Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Rock Show with Connor Farrell. Today, our guest is legendary rock radio host, fitness icon, and the co-founder of the wildly successful Gas Digital Network. It's Mr. Ralph Sutton himself. Cue intro. Okay, now that you're back from the intro, Ralph, we're going to do some rapid-fire questions before delving a little bit deeper. How does that sound?
It sounds fine to me. There's no way on earth I'm going to match your energy, but I'll do the best I can.
That's perfect. That's perfect. I start high, and I lull them in, and then I slow down, and I turn into Joe Biden.
You're also more than double my age, dude, so you got to give me a break here. I'll do the best I can.
Oh, maybe half. I wish I was 120. I am, actually. I'm a vampire. Okay, so, Ralph, what is one of the first bands when you got into music that got you in?
So meaning, I'm going to ask for a more specific guideline here. Are you saying the first rock band that I got into or just music in general? Because I grew up loving a very different style of music.
Let's go with the style of music you got into.
Okay, so I grew up in, which is hilarious looking at this big white goof that I am, 6'6" and everything, but I grew up in Brooklyn, and I loved hip-hop. So it was like the early hip-hop of Run DMC, Eric B. and Rakim, all that stuff that I was breakdancing. I was in a breakdancing movie. Like, I have a very weird early part of my life at 14. But then rock, one of my best friends was a rock fan, and he hated that we couldn't see eye to eye in rock and roll, right? So for my 15th birthday, he gave me, because this is how old I am, a box of cassette tapes that was all rock bands that he wanted me to listen to. So I started listening, and the first bands that spoke to me were Aerosmith and Led Zeppelin, Kashmir and Dream On, those two songs, Led Zeppelin's Kashmir, Aerosmith's Dream On. That was my gateway drug into rock and roll. And then the next year, I started growing my hair long, and by 16, 17, I was all in on rock and roll because I finally got laid and finally started having a social life, so I became very deeply ensconced in rock and roll because of that friend of mine, who I'm still friends with to this day.
Will you be willing to say his name?
Yeah, his name's Alan, and it's funny because I had dinner with him just a couple days ago, but he's not in this world at all. And it's funny because when I started to get somewhat popular and had a radio show, I was hosting a Motley Crue concert, and I brought him with me so he could come back and meet Motley Crue, because it's kind of like he's the guy that got me into it. And I said, you know what, dude, I'm going to bring you on the air. This is when I was doing radio. We were on about, 100 stations at the time. I said, I'm going to let you give a review of Motley Crue on the station in front of 500,000 people. He goes, all right. His opening line was an expletive. I don't want to curse on the show, but it was, I said, so what'd you think of Motley Crue? He goes, the Crue effing rocked. But he didn't say effing, and it was the opening. I'm like, come on, dude, now we got to kick you off the air. But that is the guy that got me into rock and roll, and from there just cascaded out.
That's insane. Yeah, Alan, what are you doing? Come on, Alan. Okay, next rapid fire, number 2, is what is a band that you're just getting into? They could be an older band or a newer band, but for you, it's brand new.
Well, I would say that I'm always looking for newer bands that are carrying the torch for rock and roll. You know, this band is not new. Maybe they're 10 years old, but because I just recently interviewed them, I got so into them, which is Highly Suspect. I don't know if you know them, but I got really into Highly Suspect recently. And they're just really interesting band. And, you know, what will happen, as I'm sure you do this as well, because you interview rock bands, you delve into that music. And I kind of knew them a little bit, but when I was interviewing the band, I was like, let me really do a deep dive. And I was like, wow, this is a really good band. So Highly Suspect would be one of the more newish bands that I got into.
Wow. And then what's one really good song that everyone should listen to if they want to be converted?
The song is called My Name is Human, which is a weird name, but it's a weird video too. But it does also this crazy story, because I only know this because we just interviewed them. Their first 2 albums, they're basically an unknown band. Both albums had a song on it nominated for a Grammy, which is unheard of these days for like a band that was touring in a van for 50 people, and they got nominated for a Grammy, which is pretty wild.
That's pretty wild. Well, on that note, the SDR show. I mean, just the SDR show. You've had Kerry King, Ted Nugent, Alice Cooper, Dweezil Zappa, Rob Halford, Ed Roland. I've only read that. Gavin Rossdale, Mark Cuban. Like, who is the coolest guest you think you've ever had?
Well, it's such a hard question to answer, but I will say the coolest as in So I'm going to give you. I'm trying to not give you long-winded answers, so I apologize. But because you said it's rapid fire, and I've been doing
Dude, go for
anything
it.
but
No,
rapid.
wait, sorry. We're done with the rapid fire. Now for the fun stuff.
Okay.
There
So
we
like,
go. Okay.
I think sometimes I have a preconceived notion of what someone's going to be like, especially when you've watched 4 or 5 hours of interviews or whatever. You have an idea. So sometimes the coolest is, oh, that was a surprise. I thought I was going to hate them, and I really liked them. But the one that I thought was the coolest because I thought, well, this guy's going to, it took us a year to get him, right? And I thought he was going to come with an entourage. I thought it was going to be difficult. And it was Mark Cuban, right? Mark came by himself, walked up the street, is like just kind of waved at me, came in by himself. Not only did we have a great hour interview, but then he like asked me, we traded emails. We became email buddies for a while. It's pre-COVID, so I kind of lost touch over the years. But like he tried to put me on his, at the time he was owned some HD channel. I forgot what it was called, like HD Music or something, whatever he owned. He doesn't own it anymore, but he wanted me to be a host over there. Like we just clicked for whatever reason. And it took us a year to get him. The night before is when I was told, oh, he'll do tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And I went in with this preconceived notion, this guy's going to be a ass, like just going to be so difficult. But he was so laid back and chill that it was disarming. He came by himself, left by himself. Nobody picked him up. He just walked off the block. Like, well, that's cool as shit. That was surprising. So to me, that's the one that I would say was the coolest as a surprise.
Man, well then which one? I mean, dude, Zach Wild podcast on your net. I mean, how did you get over the star? Were you starstruck when you met him, or was he was an undiscovered?
So I started out in rock radio. I did radio for 15 years. That eventually that show was on about 100 stations. So I was meeting every rock star on the planet back then because radio used to mean something. It doesn't mean anything anymore. But back then, radio's like, oh my God, you're on 100 stations. Let's talk to this guy. So I ended up becoming friendly with Zach. And in fact, what's funny, and also through hosting Shiprocked, which I did for 10 years, I met every rock band through there as well. And just some of them I stayed friends with. And Zach is one of them where we would still text for years. We stayed friends. So getting him on the network, which he only did the show for about a year. Then when Pantera reunited, it's like, dude, I'm just not going to be able to do the show anymore. I kind of get it, dude. So that didn't happen, but it was fun. And we still text. If you go on my Instagram, I hilariously used AI to make a terrible Pantera walk cover as if it was like a laid back song, right? Just kind of a funny song. And I posted it and I said, I'm sorry. And it tagged Zach Wild in it. And then his wife texted me and said, we love it, which is funny. But, so I've stayed friends with a lot of these guys over the years.
Wicked. I mean, yeah. Okay. So how do you approach an episode? Well, who is someone you were like kind of starstruck by? Because I know you're up here. I mean, so who starstruck you?
So this is back in radio days. I also always tried to not get too crazy because I grew up, my mom booked comedy clubs, right? So I grew up around comedians and singers. She was comedians and singers. So I knew Chris Rock before he was famous, Ray Romano before he was famous, a bunch of other like comedians that my mom was just booking. I was 14 and it was cheaper than a babysitter. So we would be sitting in the back of the club meeting these people. In fact, Ray Romano has done the podcast from Everybody Loves Raymond. And how that happened was I was sitting at a restaurant in California. He was next to me. And I was like, look, my mom's name is Leah Sutton. He's like, oh, I remember your mom. Of course. She put me on stage earlier and we traded information and he did the podcast because of my mom. So I grew up around it. So I never got too struck. The one time I was like, this is actually fucking happening right now.
Yeah, go for it.
Standing in the record label in New York City at Sony, I believe it was, and out next to me, there's a fruit bowl on the counter, and I'm waiting to go do the interview, and comes Ozzy Osbourne, and he grabs an apple, and he just leans up against the wall next to me, eating an apple, and he's like, hey, how you doing? I'm like, good. I'm like, well, this is weird. I'm just eating fruit with Ozzy Osbourne is strange, And so that moment was a little surreal. But what was funny about it was the way they did it back then. This is maybe 15 years ago. There were 6 of us. We all got 10 minutes. We all had to be in a room together. And they say, each of you's got 10 minutes. We're rolling tape. You get in a line, 10, 10, 10, 10, and we'll give you all the same cassette. You pull off your 10 minutes. And he said, "Who wants to go first?" And the room was like, no one wanted to go first. I'm like, "Screw it, I'll go first." And I did a great interview with Ozzy. It was so much fun. It was right when his book came out, and we had a fun interview. And then I get up, and the next guy goes, and like perfectly, like I was always good with timing. Ended at like 9 minutes and 55 seconds. I got up and moved on, and the next guy comes in, and the next guy's holding a piece of paper, shaking his head. He's so nervous that he's talking to Ozzy, he can't even get the first question out. And then Ozzy looks up and goes, "Could we bring the last guy back?" And it got a big laugh in the room, and that helped everybody else go on. And it just was great to have that moment.
Man, well, okay, so I guess the question I was trying to ask you, and tell me if this is even makes sense to ask, when you have a guest coming on that's like out of this world for you, how do you get there? How do you prepare for that?
I do forever since the radio show. I do hours of research. I will watch videos from early days all the way up to new days. I'll read news articles. I'll try and find weird facts, and I put it in order like a spreadsheet. Originally it looks like psychopathic scribblings because it's like just things that I watch. I even have this thing here, which is like a little voice recorder. Because when I go running, I listen to the podcast and I'll make a note like, "Oh, he went to school in Iowa. Oh, he likes cats," or whatever. And then I put it all together and try and lay it out in some sort of semblance of a format. Because once you're prepared and you kind of feel like you know what the guy is like or the girl is like, it just puts me at ease. I don't get nervous at that point because I feel like I have enough material that even if they're giving one-word answers, I'm going to be able to do my 45 minutes because I know where I'm at. Like I feel like I have a sense of who that person is. And that's what I've been doing since I'm almost your age. I started in entertainment, I think. Well, I started in clubs when I was 20, but started working in radio at like 28. So it's 20 something years, you know?
Yeah, well, you're a pro. It shows, of course. You don't need me telling you that. But so let's move on to this. The impact of comedy on podcasting. What do you think that's been?
I think it's weird. The reason being that now it's omnipresent, right? It used to be when I was growing up, you'd have to wait. It's with everything now. Everything is instant gratification, right? So it used to be if you wanted to see a TV show, you'd have to wait for it to come on. If you wanted to talk to your friend, you'd have to wait for them to be home because you wouldn't be able to call whenever you want. And now if you want comedy, it's everywhere and anywhere at any moment of any day. So I feel it has diluted the entire experience because there's just so much of it, and it's just that much harder to find a way to make a name for yourself in any field. It took comedy longer, I feel, but now what's interesting is comedy as a source like podcasting or YouTube clips, whatever, has replaced the sitcom. There's no sitcoms anymore. There's no real comedy shows anymore because it's omnipresent everywhere else. So what's the point? Like, why are you doing that? You could just watch it all the time. So that's the biggest effect is that, I mean, right now I can't think of one big comedy that's on TV or Netflix. None of it. It's like, unless it's somebody's new hour, there's no actual comedy shows anymore.
Yeah. And then on the comedian side, on the artist side, let's say you're replacing a sitcom with doing your own thing. How does that affect the career trajectory of a comedian?
Well, the funny thing is, especially with podcasting, your goal as a comedic podcaster is to fill seats on the road. That is why you started a podcast. You want to get more people to know who you are so that when you're around traveling, that's the sole goal. Most podcasts have a goal of that, or maybe they're selling seminars, maybe they're selling a book or whatever. That's the goal of 90% of podcasts is an ancillary revenue stream, right? Mm-hmm. If the podcast makes you money, great, but really you're selling something else. I never was doing that. I started the podcast because I knew radio was dying, and I just wanted somewhere else to have a creative outlet to interview people and do stuff. Sorry. My co-host is a comic, so their goal was to fill seats. Mine never was. So we had different trajectories and different causes for starting the podcast. Most comedians, their sole goal for a podcast is to fill seats.
Yes. So let's take someone like you. Let's take someone who wants to interview bands. How do you approach podcasting? And basically, I guess that is the full-time thing, right?
Right. Well, the network is the full-time thing.
Well,
because
yes,
we have
yes.
like I think 15 shows on the network, and most of my day, like I'm looking at my phone now, lighting up a half a dozen times in the past 15 minutes, because there's 15, 20 shows on the network. There's 30 employees that work at Gas Digital, and my job, and any and I hate the word entrepreneur, but any business owner will tell you that 90% of their day is just putting out fires. That's what you're doing. There's something wrong. The website's down. The cameras are out. The this is down, and they go to you for answers. And the truth is, most people they need somebody that's going to say, okay, do this, or okay, do that. They just need somebody to reaffirm what they want to do, and that's what your job is. Most of the day is putting out fires. That's 80 to 90% of my day is that. Then what I spend the rest of the day is prepping for my shows, trying to make. I do three podcasts a week, 2 SDRs, 1 Good Sugar, and then that's when I am trying to make something fun there. But most of my day is spent trying to put out trying to put out fires.
Oh, you're trying to put out flipping fire.
Yeah.
Oh, voice crack. Like you said, I'm 21, right? Come on, Ralph. Come on.
Yeah.
Wake up. Just trying to wake
How
you
long
up.
have you been in this game, by the way, Connor? Because you are young.
This game. Probably, I mean, consistently, maybe like 3 months, 4 months.
Oh, wow. That's cool. Because you know what's
Yeah.
funny? So I was hosting, I don't know if you know it because you're so young, but it's called Shiprocked. It's a pretty popular like rock and roll music cruise. It's usually 15
Yes.
bands, 6,000 people. And I was hosting it for 10 years straight since it started. And then when I was turning 50, so now almost 5 years ago, my thought was there's some 20-something-year-old kid in, I don't know, Idaho or Iowa or California in your case, that would give their left arm to host this thing. And I'm hosting it out of a feeling of like loyalty to the cruise company or, obligation. And I wasn't even really enjoying it anymore. I would always give 100%, but I was like, you know what? I'm going to step down. I'm going to be 50. I'm going to step down, go get some kid to do it that's going to be thrilled. So that's why I stepped down from most of the things I was hosting, because it just felt weird to me at that point.
Yeah. Well, I guess here's something interesting. Do you think that the revenue from podcasts has helped comedians go from working day jobs and help them bridge that gap to doing it full time?
100%. Well, interesting thing about it. So this is the analogy. I try to tell everyone to start a podcast. I think that's the reason why you should. If you're looking to be in some sort of social media context, whether it's Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, I don't care what, what's that new one? Something Stack, what is it? Whatever it's called, Substack. There's so many different things to do, right? It all sounds daunting. Then I tell you there's 10 million podcasts, and you're like, well, oh my God, 10 million podcasts. How am I going to stand out against 10 million, right? So now let's look at the numbers. A CPM rate, which to those that don't know is cost per thousand. That's roughly what you make as any sort of entertainer in the digital landscape. What is the metric per thousand, right? So for a podcast, if you're a clean podcast that doesn't curse and you have a pretty good audience, let's say it's about $15, maybe $20, $10 on the low end. Let's say 10 to 20, average it at 15, right?
Is that per minute or is that per?
Per 1,000 listeners. So if you run an ad,
1,000 listeners per.
Yeah. So if you have 1,000 listeners on your podcast and you run an ad and you have a CPM rate of $20 for easy math, that would mean you get $20. If you have 2,000 listeners, you get $40. So that's for a 30-second or 60-second spot. That's roughly just a basic metric, right? But YouTube, Instagram, TikTok pay progressively less. I think YouTube's around $5 to $7. Instagram might be $2, and TikTok I think is $1, right? For that same CPM rate of per 1,000, right? Now let's look at if you have 50,000 listeners on a podcast, you could make a living. If you have 50,000 followers on Instagram, it's meaningless. No one cares about someone with 50,000 listeners. On Instagram, you need 1 million, 2 million Instagram followers for anybody to care in terms of like getting social media deals or whatever. But if you could get 50,000 listeners to your podcast, you can make an actual living, which is a far lower metric. So start with that. But then there's only 10 million podcasts. There's, I don't know, 1 billion people on TikTok, 900 million on Instagram, whatever it is. So then where would you want to go more? Where you need to get 2 million people in a sea of 900 million or just 50,000 in a sea of 10 million? it seems far more logical. So I always push people to do a podcast. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, this is what I was hoping to hear.
And then
Doing a
there's the
podcast.
ROI, the return on investment in a podcast, right? An auditory experience for a listener, it's far more genuine. The example I will give is that we've tried developing podcasts with big Instagrammers. This kid that had, I think he had like 7 million Instagram followers, super, super popular. We started a podcast with him. He couldn't get more than 5,000 listeners because Instagram people really didn't care. They just say, show me your silly little content. I don't want to hear you talk for 45 minutes, right? That's what happened. It never caught on, and he stopped his podcast. But in that context, he's running ads. Nobody's buying shit because they don't care about him. But if you build your audience on a podcast where they really care and feel a connection to you, you will get much higher ROIs, thereby keeping your sponsors longer. We've had sponsors on SDR for 4 years, which is crazy because we've built an audience that love us and love them, so they support us by buying those products. So that ROI, because of the auditory experience of watching or listening every week for an hour, it's a different experience than that fly-by-night Instagram or reel flicking that you may watch and get a giggle out of, but you don't feel any real connection to.
Now let me hit you with a question. So I've been posting this. I tried posting on all the different places, like you said, right? And so I'm currently just posting on YouTube, Spotify. There we go, Spotify, and Instagram. And on Instagram, I get the most views, and my average watch time is the highest. So that's where so it's interesting for me because I built most of my followers from playing guitar, doing shows, things like that. And then the real advantage I've seen is if I have a guest, about half of their followers converts into views on the video. And so just I did math, assuming maybe 25 minutes or $25 for, was it 30 seconds or 60 seconds, something like that. And I did the math and I was like, okay, if I have, let's say 2,000 views average per episode within the first 30 days times 20 episodes, that's whatever, like 40,000 views. And I got roughly about, if you did 10 ads per episode, that's 200 ads times whatever.
You're going to run 10 ads in an episode? Who the hell would run 10 ads?
That's the question. Here we go. Yeah, okay. So is that insane?
That's insane.
Okay, good.
That is insane. So on average, it should be no more than 1 or 2 ads, maybe 3. But I would even say that's a lot for a 45-minute episode, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to have what killed radio and killed regular TV was greedy. So they started running, there was a time when I was doing radio where each hour of radio was 40 minutes of music, 5 minutes of talk, and 15 minutes of commercials. Sometimes 20 minutes of commercials. And I was like, that's almost half the hour is talking. It's like you're pissing people off. Like you forced podcasting to be created in the same way that when the music industry got greedy and CDs were $20 and you were lucky if there's 1 or 2 good songs, they forced MP3s to be created because people I'm not spending $20 for 1 song. And they almost made that happen. So to me, I don't ever air more than 2, maybe 3 ads. You might do a cold open with a sponsorship and an end with the sponsorship, but you don't get a lot of money for pre and post rolls, really. But mid rolls are where it's at, and live reads, of course, more than pre-recorded reads. But it just, to me, you should never run more than 2 or 3 at most in a 40-minute, 45-minute thing. And then also, you're never going to get a $25 CPM. That's crazy. Unless you're one of the most popular podcasts on the planet that has, people clamoring to get an open spot. I think, if you're under, I don't know how many listeners you have, but if you're under 50,000 listeners, you're not going to get more than $10 CPMs. You're just not.
Yeah.
And then usually out of that 10, the advertising, whoever sold it is going to take commission out of it, might be as high as 20%. So that $10 becomes $8, but it's still, it's decent money. It can be. So podcasts on my network that have 50,000 listeners can make a living if they're doing 2 shows a week. I'm not saying it's a glorious living, but you don't need to worry about paying your bills. If you can get to that point, and like your podcast doesn't do anything stupid like mine, SDR Show does a lot of dumb stuff that drops your CPM rate, because if there's porn stars, if there's a lot of cursing, if there's a lot of suggestive content, you're not going to get the same CPM rates that a mainstream show that has normal interviews with no cursing. You're just going to get more money there. And then in the other part of your question, you want to be everywhere people are looking. There's a great quote from David Lee Roth from Van Halen when he said, I know my CD is going to be at Tower Records in LA and New York, but I want to make sure it's at Bob's CDs in Iowa because I want to be where people are looking. So in the same respect, you want your clips or your long form on every platform that you can be, because you never know where they're going to convert from. So it doesn't cost you to be on Instagram. It doesn't cost you to be on YouTube. It doesn't cost you to be on TikTok. Be everywhere. Anywhere you can. I don't know who's hosting you, but let's say like a Libsyn or a Blueberry or wherever they're doing it. Whatever links they have, just click yes, because it costs you nothing and you want to be where people are looking. And it's great for SEO purposes, because the more backlinks you have online, the more people are going to find you.
Excellent.
That's a long-winded answer, but I apologize.
Yes. So let's say you've got views on Instagram, right? Do they count equally across with YouTube views?
You can
with
sell
downloads?
it you could sell it as part of your packaging if you're going to run the commercial in your Instagram, but then if it's only a 2-minute clip and 30 seconds of that is a commercial, good luck on retention, So you don't want to do that. I think if you are, and it depends on what you want your platform to be. If you're looking for long form,
let me clarify. So on Instagram, I post this entire thing, so you can upload up to 59 minutes, and so I actually get people stopping, and I've gotten like lots of people like actually responding and messaging, and they're referencing things from like 40 minutes into an episode. And so I realized, I'm like, okay, I have views and I've got higher watch time than any other platform. So I guess in that case, if it's a 45-minute episode with ads, would that be equivalent in terms of CPM?
Include that in your pitch when you're selling ads. The weird thing is some platforms like YouTube, they have weird rules with when you put your own ads into a show. Sometimes if it's something that they're against, or if it's something that they're just be sure, because I don't put long form on my Instagram or my TikTok or my X. It's called. X is weird because if they just show the video, even if it's for a half second, it counts as a view, which is insane. I don't know how Instagram works with that, but then you just have to worry if Instagram counts a second as a view. I don't know what they do. Like on podcasts, they have to watch a certain amount or listen to rather a certain amount before it counts as a view. So what happens is if you're counting all these little incremental watches on Instagram, on X, or YouTube as a view, then your ROI on the ad is going to be much lower because they're not real views, and you're going to lose your sponsor when they're paying for a higher price show that's not returning the way they think it will. So it's a balancing act of finding what makes the most sense.
So how do you get that ROI?
Well, having a show where people care about you is probably the most, like the political shows on my network do the best. Those are the ones where people, and then the comedy. Political and the comedy are the ones that do the best. Sadly, my type of show has the music shows. Me, Jamie Josta, Zach Wilde was on for a bit. What's his name? Dee Snider had a show for a bit. The Rockstar ones, for some reason, have a lower loyalty rate. Like, especially with a show like mine and a guest like yours, that's so guest dependent.
Yeah.
It so wildly fluctuates dependent on the guest. So those people are coming in because so-and-so is on.
Got it.
And they may not give a crap about you. They're coming because you're interviewing whoever.
Yep.
So there's not as much loyalty to you as an audience. So you have to factor that in as well.
Yes. So then does it make more sense? So I've got a band. I've been playing, yada, yada, yada. Does it make more sense if then people come for you and you're like, but even then you're saying like Dee Snider, right, or Zach Wilde, those shows don't.
They didn't.
So
I don't know why. I can't
What's
explain
up?
it, but they didn't hit as well. I don't know why. The comedians get high ROI for sure, and political does the best for some reason. But I don't know. I can't actually answer why that is. I can just give you the metrics from what I've seen because Gas Digital's been around, I think, almost 8 years, and I just can see that, especially not to talk politics at all, but we are in an election year. So because we're in an election year, there's much more desire to spend money in the political landscape anyway. So the ads that are coming to us are very interested in any political platforms because that's where they feel people are most engaged right now. I don't know where it's
Yes.
going to be a year from now, but this past year and the year we're in right now, very much so, highly politically charged time. A lot of people want to spend money in the political landscape.
So a peek behind the curtain. I'm a rock star. I would like to be able to make, figure out what's that first step for me is being able to make a living. And
Right.
so my brain goes, is it through podcasts, right? Is it through merchandise? Is it through live ticket sales?
Mhm.
And then kind of thinking, what is the biggest contributor to that, and what should I put all my energy into starting out?
Right. So
What would you advise?
I would tell you, first of all, like if I could go back in
Yeah.
time to when SDR first started, I would make it less about the guests because there was a great quote that someone told me when I was running rock clubs, and they
Yeah.
said, if you serve your customers filet mignon, they're not going to show up when you're serving hamburger, right? So by that metric is the bigger your guests are, yes, your numbers will go up that week, but very few are going to come back. If you interviewed Paul McCartney last week, and then this week you're interviewing me, they'll be like, well, who the hell is that? Like, I came from Paul McCartney, so it just, the reality is that you're just not going to be able to sustain that forever. Like one time I was arguing with my publicist, and they said, if you could get more of these high profile acts on the show, it would be so much easier to get press. I'm like, shocking. Yeah, I know that, but you book them. You know how hard it is to book high profile guests? Like, that's not an answer. It's a stupid answer, of course. Why don't we get, Tom Hanks next week? It doesn't make any sense. So, but if I go back in time, I would make it less guest dependent. You're in a band, you're a singer, find a way to work that angle. It will take longer to build. There's no doubt. But those people are there for you, not for who's coming on. Maybe once a month or once every 8 weeks, you bring in, oh, this is a guest we've always wanted to talk to, and you make it a specialty show. That's different than my whole brand is on who's coming on that week. And that's just the unfortunate truth. If I could go back in time, I would have done it differently. But at the time when we were starting the podcast, I was doing radio, and I would have guests come on the radio show every week. And I just said, hey, after the radio interview, hang out. We'll do a podcast for a half hour. Most of them were like, what the hell's a podcast? And I explained it, just trust me, and we do it. And that's how the podcast started. And then it just kept going from there. But if I could go back in time, it's actually 10 years I've been doing SDR show, I would have done it differently. I'm just telling you now, make it more about you. You're a good-looking kid. You can play guitar and sing. That's where you should lean into. You're going to get followers because of that. And it's far better for you financially in the long term and on that higher ROI to build it around you. Me, it was always hard. I'd rather interview someone famous. I'd rather do the interview. So it was different. But if you're already in that rock star persona, make it about you and your band and what you're going through. That's far more interesting, I feel. And once in a while, bring on somebody that has something to say.
So what do you think of someone like Andrew Schultz? Where from my kind of outside, it looks like he has on guests, but he's also a comedian, and so you can kind of do both. You could leverage the guests to get more eyes, but then
one of his shows for a long time was just him and Charlemagne and nothing else. That's what they did. It was just it was called, what is it called, the Beautiful Idiots or something? I think it was called.
Something like that.
Brilliant and they did that, just the two of them, for years. That was what they did.
Yeah.
The funny thing about Andrew is, years ago, like 9-10 years ago, he would call me and I would explain to him how to set up an RSS feed, what a podcast, like what software to use, because he was a friend of a friend and he was starting his podcast. He didn't know anything. So I would show him how to do some basic shit 10 years ago. And now he's, podcast royalty almostly at this point. It's kind of funny to see his trajectory over the past decade, but he's also a brilliant comic. So as you're going around, just like you, if you're out doing music, every night on stage, you should be talking about your podcast. ABP, always be promoting. You should always be out there. You should never leave your house without stickers in your back pocket. And I used to consider a day a failure when I first started. If I didn't talk to at least 5 people about my podcast on a daily basis, then something's wrong. The story I've always told was I was on jury duty like 8 years ago. And at the end of that jury duty, 11 people subscribed to my podcast because they made sure every other juror subscribed and I watched them subscribe. I was like, just hit subscribe. And I would do that all the time in the beginning. You had to build your audience. That's what you got to do. I still leave with a couple of stickers in my back pocket every day. You just have to. I have them at the door, and as I'm walking out, I put 2 in my back pocket.
Well, I can relate. I do a similar thing. I've got stickers for my band. It's called Black Licorice. Ladies and gentlemen, go listen to Black Licorice. You can find it on my Instagram. You can find it everywhere. On Spotify, on all the platforms, Apple Music, wherever music is found. But I have stickers. I always do that, right? So
But you should be doing it for your podcast too, is what I'm saying.
That's what I was going to say. At shows or anytime I talk to anyone, I go, oh, I have a podcast. That's like, I'm a podcaster. I don't tell them what I'm studying in school. I don't tell them any of that stuff. I'm like, no, I'm a podcaster. And but I take their phone. They're like, oh, let me look it up. And it's Instagram, and I go follow. And then I'm like, now here's the other thing. Follow that. I'm like, oh, you want to see the Spotify? Download.
Exactly. You got to, because people, like, it's funny, in the beginning, if you go through our iTunes reviews on SDR Show, for years it says, okay, dude, here's your 5-star review. Like, because I was shambling people into giving reviews. They're like, all right, Ralph, you asked for 5-star, here's your 5-star. Like, I just would do it all the time. And that's why once SDR was once, and the 11th podcast, not in comedy, just the 11th podcast for like one day, because it was a day like a bunch of people signed up, and we were up there in the top, almost the top 10 of every podcast in the world. We're usually in the top 200 of comedy, but this was in number 11 in the world. It was crazy.
Man, so let's say you do get the views like that. You get to a point where you're getting, you said 50,000 views an episode, 2 a week or whatever, right? What would the approach be in someone like my position? Would you say keep it doing your own, reach out to sponsors yourself, or would you try and go through a company?
So, first of all, the only metric every ad sales company will care about is how many listens does a show have at the end of a month, right? And because if you're doing 1 a week, so that's a good way, just a good average, but if you're doing 2 a week, fine. It's just you take the 2 that are a month old and average them. But then we average the 3rd week, 4th week, and 5th week old, and then divide by 3. So you're getting an average, because depending on the guest, you could have a wildly different average. So if you just look at 1, and it was 1 when you did, like my co-host Jay Okerson quit a few months ago, and that last episode has double the listenership that a normal episode for my show does because of what happened. So that's not a fair assessment. So we just average 3, right? So let's say your average is 50,000 for the purposes of math. Personally, what I did when I first started, I used to be a strip club DJ. I went to a strip club that I used to work at. I showed them that we had X amount of listeners in Jersey. I said, look, we have this amount of listeners in Jersey. You give me $50 a week, and I'll make sure we don't talk about any other strip club. The guy took $200 out of his pocket and goes, here, I just bought for a month, So that was it, and that's how I started. But then eventually, once we had enough listeners, then we started selling our own ads. But how I did that at the time, which not everybody could do, was it was added value to my radio show, because we were already were working with a company that was selling us for radio. I said, hey, kick in this amount and I'll put ads on the podcast. It's a very different time now, 10 years later. Yeah. Most podcast hosting companies have an opt-in for ad sales. You're going to get a lower CPM rate, but it's a great way to sell unused real estate. You just let them sell ads. If they happen, great. If they don't happen, whatever. Then you sell your own ads that are doing live read. Those are going to be DAI, dynamic ad insertion ads, where you just set a marker where you want them to run their pre-recorded ad, and then that, if it happens, great. If it doesn't, whatever. And then you go sell your own ads, and those you'll do either live read, do them on your own if you have time, or you partner with a company. We have a company that we created called the Ad Side, that we sell ads for Gas Digital, which is our own network, but we make it, it's a separate company, and we sell for about 20 other shows. We were selling for Kill Tony, we were selling for Barbara Corcoran, we've sold for Mike Tyson. Like, we sell ads for different people that come and go, but there's a billion companies like mine that will do that for you. So you find one that's on brand, and if you have enough listeners, you're going to be enticing to them. You know what I mean? So you do that 1-2 punch, and then the chances are that you're sold out personally and your online DAI sold out is non-existent. It really is not going to happen. And that would just mean the worst case is 1 episode, you had 4 ads, 2 from you, 2 from them. Big deal. That won't happen that often. So that's what we tend to go for. And I would say 90% of the time, it's only 2 or 3 ads, one each, 2, 1, 1, 2, and that's the way to do it to maximize your revenue.
Excellent. So, what do you think is in the future for rock?
For rock, it's funny. Well, rock is dead. I hate to tell you, right?
Well, so here, okay. Well, let me ask the question. Okay, I think there's the legacy artists up here from the label days, because the labels would do all of this stuff like promoting you, putting you on MTV, connecting you with managers, connecting you with all these people. But these people are all here, and so my idea is if I build a giant podcast, a big platform, then I can connect all the people, and they all want to work with me because they get my clout. And so then I have the advantage of the label and the marketing. And so
I
for
agree
those
with you,
rockers
but what
who
I
do it
mean by rock
themselves,
is being dead is that rock will never dominate the Billboard
Yes.
100 like it did for 30 years, right? Where you could count on the 70s, 80s, 90s, I'd say 40 years, even in the 2000s, there'd always be a half a dozen rock bands in the top 50 of Billboard. That's not happening anymore. It's just not. Bands don't dominate anymore. People will go see bands. And I do think with AI, there's going to be a movement craving live performance, craving non-AI generated. Like there's going to be like TV shows and plays and things where they say no AI used, and that's going to be a thing because everyone's going to be so sick of AI generated whatever. So that's going to become, I think you're going to see a surge in live performance because of that. So I do think that and if people do crave live music, there's a connection you feel with live music that you'll never feel with anything else. But when I say rock is dead, I just mean on the grand scale of where it used to be. That will never happen again. What can happen, and I forget who said it, but if you get 1,000 people to show up at a show or 1,000 people to buy your new whatever, you can survive the rest of your life. So it's finding that niche is what the goal should be, as opposed to being the next band that's going to sell out giant stadium, because that's probably not going to happen.
Yes. So for finding those 1,000 people, what would you recommend? Like if you were giving advice to a comedian, you'd probably say, and maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong, you'd be like, do a podcast, go do open mics, go book shows, go do the road when you can. For a rock person, myself, and the listeners, and all the bands I interview.
Would say, go ahead. I'm sorry. What were you going to say?
No, what would you say?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I would say the unfortunate truth, right? Like, if I wasn't in this space, I probably wouldn't have social media, right? I just don't like it personally. I use Instagram solely to hit on women. That's what I do because I'm a creep. That's what I do, right? I don't use it to promote. I have someone that does that. They promote for me. I hate it. I'm not that kind of person, right? But if you are someone who is looking to make a name for themselves, social media is a requirement. It's like saying, I want to be a rock band, but I don't want to put out albums, in the 70s and 80s. You're like, well, good luck. You're never going to become famous if they can't play you on radio. The necessary evil was putting it down on actual vinyl so people could buy it and listen to it. That's what social media is now. It is a requirement, right? And for bands, and I've seen this happen, I think it was Dua Lipa, not a rock band, but one of the first to go famous from TikTok clips. If you can put music that is shareable, that's going to be what makes you. And then people now hunt. Oh, where is that song from? I'm not saying your videos, but your songs. If you never know. Like, what was the band? Was it Hinder that we had on? And one of their songs just went viral on TikTok. I forget what song it was, but for like a reveal, like one of those reveal TikToks, And then it turned into them selling a shit ton of music again because of that viral moment. People say, oh, what is that song? And even if it's 1%, now all you need is that 1% if it goes viral for 10 million people, so that's what I would look at. Number one. Number two, as you said, just get out there and play. And with podcasts, which I tell everyone, if you're in the podcast world, get on every podcast. Who cares if there's 5 people listening to that podcast? If you're starting out, you want to get one of those 5 people to start listening to you now, right? So that's how you build. I rarely say no to going on another show, even now, right? I don't. If someone asks like you did, in an earnest way, I didn't do the due diligence to see, well, let me see how many followers he has. Let me listen to a few episodes. I don't care if it can work in my time frame. who knows how many people listen, and I just want to get a few of them to go, I'll check out that idiot. He seemed interesting enough. What am I losing? I'm home right now. It doesn't matter. So if you get to a point where 15 hours of your day you're doing stuff, yeah, dial back. But right now for me, always, like especially now, I have the surgery coming. I've cut down my schedule a lot, so I don't have a lot to go on until I recover.
Yeah. So
you asked at the right time, is what I'm saying.
Well, thank you, Ralph. Anyways, what do you got going on in the future? What are you looking forward to?
So, as I just said, I have this horrible surgery coming up. It's 3 different surgeries. It's a septoplasty, a terpene something, and then a sinus reconstruction. It's called FESS, F-E-S-S, something sinus surgery. I forget what it stands for. But that's happening on Thursday, and it's going to take 2 weeks to recover, and I can't fly for a month. So I'm going to be missing our comedy festival that we put every year called Skankfest, but I can't go because I'm not allowed to fly for a month. But what's been happening for SDR is we transitioned to a new co-host. I'm still searching for a new co-host. We've been different people have been coming, ranging from TJ Miller, Dub Davidoff, Josh Adamari. Different people have been co-hosting with me, and I'm going to pick somebody by the end of September to be my new co-host. And my other podcast on health and wellness called the Good Sugar Podcast. We have a store that's on 3rd Avenue and 69th Street, and we're opening up a new store soon. So those are the things that are probably first and foremost on my list. And we're probably going to do another guest is called 30 Minutes With. We did it a year and a half ago where we picked 6 comics and we did 30-minute comedy specials with each of them. And we're probably going to do that again next year.
Okay. Excellent. So I guess, yeah,
you.
what do you look forward to in terms of, I don't know, is there anything that you see that you think is going to be like new in the next coming years, right? Like, do you see bands? I don't know.
I mean,
guess,
what I love is I've been screwing around with AI galore. AI to create songs, AI to make intros. It's fun as shit. It's just so much fun to do. It's great if you're a podcaster. You're different. You're a musician. But like we used to say, all right, we need an intro for this. Now I can just write dumb lyrics and say, make a pop song. And it does it. It's great. Or I need an image of 3 elephants holding a gorilla. I used to have to get my artist to do it. Now I can just go on AI and say, hey, make this. That's fascinating to me to see where it goes. With music, I do feel, as I said to you earlier, there's going to be a resurgence for live music because of the AI. People are going to want to go out more and see live music more. So I'm very excited to that. But we're on the precipice of a wild election year, a wild time in AI. I don't know where we're going to be in a year. And the uncertainty is actually pretty exciting.
Okay. And then how do you go about picking, let's say, for a rock podcast, and if some of my viewers start podcasting, what would you recommend they look for when they're looking for, let's say, advertisers on a podcast?
Well, there's plenty of companies that do it. Ours is one of them, theadside.com. Look on I would say start with the easiest way, which is look at your media hosting company and see if they have an opt-in to sell ads, because that's an immediate one. They have network-wide spots that they're looking to place, and that's going to be the easiest, lowest barrier to entry. You're not going to get the highest CPM rate, but you're going to sell ads almost immediately. That's number one. And then once you get to that 15, 20,000 listener barrier, that's when you can start looking at ad companies, because that's usually 20,000 is the metric, 25, 20, depending on what space you're in. If you're in politics, if you're in comedy, whatever, if you're a safe show or not safe show, 20, 25,000 is when you can start reaching out to ad sales companies to sell ads for your show. But you need far less than that if you're using your media hosting and they're doing DAI, dynamic ad insertion.
Yes. And so when you talk about 20,000, 25,000, can you look at monthly views for like what's the average views per month?
No, you're talking about at the end of a month, that one episode. That's the metric that they're going to ask you for.
So with the average of one episode.
So you take today's show, a month from now, how many listeners does it have? You could say across all platforms, but if you're doing DAI with your podcast, they're not going to be able to insert that ad everywhere else. So it's just going to be on the podcast.
Yes. So then the question I guess I'm curious about is if your aggregate monthly, let's say you do 40,000 views, and there's one episode with 30,000 and the rest have 1,000, is it better to just do
That's what I was saying
episodes?
before. That's why you got to do that average, because you never know. That's what they're going to look for, and you want to make sure that you do a decent ROI for them, or they're not going to use you again. And also, by the way, I don't mean to be rude. I have 2 more minutes left because my mom is waiting for me because I got to go for this pre-surgery meeting for my surgery.
Okay, well, let's wrap it up. Thank you guys for watching. We have a very cool outro graphic and theme song that I've made. Ralph, thank you for joining us. Is there any place that people should come and find you? Let them know.
It's easy. I am everywhere at I am Ralph Sutton and IamRalphSutton.com. My podcast, The SDR Show, Sex, Drugs, and Rock and Roll Show. The other podcast, The Good Sugar Podcast, and GasDigital.com for all things Gas Digital.
Okay. Thank you for watching.